What's up, everybody? Welcome back to Nuts and Bolts Sports. Raj and Jordan here, as always. Not really as always, because we're following a weekend where I wasn't here. But thank you for joining us. Number one question from the weekend, Jordan. A scale from 1 to 10, how much you miss me?
I
I guess I'll take that as a zero. I'll take that as a zero.
Nah, ANAP. It was definitely different having to run the show,
Yeah.
on my own, on my end. But thankfully, we had one of our newcomers, Henry, came in, did a really good job, helped kind of keep the conversation going, which was cool, and definitely somebody that I think we'll look to incorporate further. So thankfully, on the basketball side, we didn't miss a beat. However, we definitely didn't have as much LeBron talk because you weren't here. So I'm sure we'll get some more of that today.
As much LeBron bias is what you actually mean. Thank you for holding down the fort, and thanks to Henry for filling in. And I'm sure, like you said, he did great, and we're going to definitely have him on in the coming weeks. So just keep an eye out for him because I agree, he was great. So, but let's get into it because we do have a busy sort of weekend of basketball. I'll be completely honest with you. I was at a wedding this weekend, didn't watch a whole lot of basketball, but I did catch bits and pieces here. Did catch the Lakers game last night, so I do have some stuff to talk about. But let's go ahead and start with that Lakers game number 2 against the Rockets. Similar situation to the whole Portland series. Lakers lose the first one, and people are like, uh-oh, and then the Rockets, Rockets think they're on fire, and then come into game 2, and it's, they catch up, but they didn't play all that well yesterday. Houston didn't. They pushed the Lakers a couple times, and when they did make it an interesting game. But for the most part, I think that Los Angeles had a pretty good handle on yesterday, and seemed like a pretty good bounce back for them. But what are your thoughts after watching game 1?
Well, yeah, so before we get into game 2, obviously game 1, really disappointing loss for the Lakers. I thought they were going to come out a little bit more prepared, especially on defense. I thought their rotations were poor. They were giving up a ton of open threes, especially in the corner. Just didn't seem to have a good game plan of what they wanted to do. And then on offense, kind of got stagnant. LeBron and AD didn't really show up in the fourth, which obviously, your stars don't do that. You're not going to win the game. So it was a really disappointing game 1. But as we saw with the Portland series, game 2, they come in, executed much better yesterday. LeBron was in much more of a rhythm and control. Same with Anthony Davis. Even just him, hitting, he still hit a lot of jumpers. I wish he'd be a little bit closer to the basket, but he was a little bit more in rhythm. They did a good job of getting him jumpers kind of while moving, which is something he's better at as opposed to like standstill. LeBron obviously putting up almost a triple-double again, did a really good job on both ends. Seems to have Russ's number in terms of blocking his shots because he had another one last night. But they got big contributions from the bench, which was huge. Markieff Morris came in 16 points off the bench. Kuzma had 13, shot 6 of 7 from the field. And then we saw Rondo kind of do his little playoff Rondo yesterday, 10, 9, and 5 steals off the bench, plus 28 in 29 minutes, someone who they closed with down the stretch. Even though I didn't think it was necessarily the best idea to have him close due to his lack of shooting, he at least was out there making plays on both ends of the floor. Had some steals on defense, so they played better. Seemed to adjust a little bit to what Houston wanted to do. Did kind of help that Russell Westbrook pretty much tanked it for Houston in the fourth quarter. Just not his day, with the turnovers and just overall lack of shooting that he provided. So it's a new series. It's tied. The kind of the nice part, I guess, about the bubble is you don't have any home court, so it's not like they have to go back to Houston. You're going to play in the same spot, and it's going to come down to who executes better. I think, especially on offense, because if the Lakers go stagnant again, they're not a team I want playing from behind. They're not a good enough shooting team. They can't be like Houston and all of a sudden just hit a bunch of 3-pointers like Houston did in the third quarter to get back in the game. So if LA can continue to execute on that end and at least limit Houston's opportunities on defense, they have a good chance. But it's going to be a tough series.
I want to hone in on that Rondo thing because that was something you and I discussed prior to this whole series starting. And, whether or not we think Rondo is, he's nowhere near the player that he was in Boston or even in his later years in Boston before he really dropped off with like his weird stints in Dallas and whatnot. But, he does seem to be enough of a force to slow down Houston's offense. And I think that he was pretty pivotal in that game too. I agree with you. I was a bit questioning why was he playing as many minutes as he was later in the game. But he was good. So I'm kind of curious, are you as a Lakers fan comfortable now with seeing him, coming off the injury, seeing the way he matches up against that Houston offense? And once he gets his legs under him a little bit more, I feel like he's going to be much more contributing to the way this series wraps up.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, he did a good job in the minutes that he had yesterday. The only issue that I had was down the stretch, especially in the fourth. I didn't think the lineup they had out there was good because they were closing with LeBron, AD, Rondo, I think Markieff Morris, and Kuzma or maybe Danny Green. It just seemed like they didn't have quite the shooters out there that I like. Ideally, around a LeBron team, you want to have him and four guys that can space the floor, especially late because he's going to get doubled and helped off of any coverage there. So I would like to see a little bit more shooting. We know Rondo's not a good 3-point shooter, but I'm perfectly fine with him playing throughout the game and kind of being that second distributor at times with LeBron. I wish that they would close a little bit better. Almost like a blessing in disguise is the fact that JaVale McGee got hurt. They didn't play Dwight Howard. JaVale played 8 minutes, and it really forced AD to play a lot of the 5 yesterday, which is what I've been wanting all year because he's just a matchup. He's a matchup nightmare for Houston regardless, but especially if he's playing at the 5, he can still switch on any pick and roll and at least make Harden and those guys work on their jumpers. And obviously he can help on other defensive assignments, protecting the rim. So that's going to be their best lineup moving forward. Rondo should definitely be a part of it for a little bit, but I would like to see them close with more shooters around LeBron.
Yeah, the shooting thing is definitely a concern because Rondo is not a shooter. But I think that now he does give them that sort of depth that they needed to give them the defensive option if it is necessary to where they need to stop somebody like a Westbrook or a Harden, that they can throw him out there and he might grab a couple extra fouls that some of these other guys would because he is getting up there in age. But I think he's going to give I think he's going to give more pressure than somebody like KCP or somebody would have. So I'm happy with that. The series is pretty interesting because I think this is more than even the Portland series where Avery Bradley would have come in key because he would have been containing those two guys on Houston more than anybody else would have.
Right.
And I feel like that's where that pressure would have come in. And Henry's here in the comments saying wouldn't be surprised if Westbrook goes off in game 3. And that's where the Bradley loss, I think, is really, really huge because if you do have a situation like that where Westbrook, who is such a streaky shooter, does decide that in game 3 he's just going to drop like 40 points and he's very capable of doing it, I don't know if the Lakers have defenders outside of LeBron and AD that can slow him down from that. And I'm just wondering if there's any concern on your end from that angle.
Yeah, I mean, you said good point with Bradley. He definitely, Bradley's not a guy that would be giving him 35 minutes a game or anything, but for 18 to 22, maybe he'd be at least out there hounding Russ and Harden, at least making them work a little bit more. We saw that in game 1. They didn't quite have that depth though, with Rondo only playing a couple of minutes, and he wasn't really effective in game 1 as he was yesterday. So you saw guys like Al Caruso in there. Caruso had like 5 fouls in game 1, was struggling. Same thing with Caldwell Pope, Danny Green. And at the end of the day, Houston's strength is, especially those two guards. You're going to have to live with what they get. But I'm also fine with how they handled it yesterday. I mean, Harden only took 12 shots in the field. To me, that's a win. That's fantastic. When one of the 5 or 6 best players in the league only wants to take less than 15 shots, that's a win for the Lakers defense. Which means they also did a good job kind of blitzing. I know, especially in the second half, they were blitzing a lot of pick and rolls, leaving Westbrook open because they knew he was pretty much a non-factor from the outside. And I'm sure they're going to continue to do that until Westbrook makes him pay if he's able to. And on the flip side, you saw Houston doing that with LeBron, kind of blitzing him and forcing Rondo to be the guy who's going to have to make shots. It's going to be kind of interesting to see which one of those two starts to hit first, because that's going to dictate what kind of defense the other team can play.
Okay, let's go ahead and transition now into the next game 2 comeback, and that's Nuggets Clippers. Did you drop my prediction last episode? Or
yeah, we were only. I thought this was a 30-minute Lakers podcast.
Oh no, sorry, I can't do that to you because I gotta talk about the Nuggets now that because I don't think I got to talk about that game 7 comeback because I wasn't on Wednesday.
No, you did not.
So a terrible game, absolutely ugly game. It's 78-80 was the final score. We had games in that series where that was like the halftime score, so that was just kind of ridiculous. But the Nuggets did pull it out. So the reason I asked, because I had told Jordan that I'm calling Nuggets in 7. Definitely in the minority here, but I just don't think that the Clippers can handle Nikola Jokic. And he's been good. He's been good in this series. Jamal Murray playing better in game 2 than he did in game 1, and that contributed to the win. But it was Jokic, 26 and 18 or something like that.
Big for him.
Just really, really solid in that sort of in that game 2 performance. And the reason that I bring that up is because he is now he does have the possibility of being out for this game with the wrist injury, the wrist sprain, which could, that could spell danger for the Nuggets if he doesn't play. I assume that he's going to power through it because the play that injury did happen was in quarter 1 of game 2 of that Nuggets Clippers series. But I am a bit concerned that if he's not 100%, that could impact my prediction, obviously, but also where the Nuggets end up going in this series. But I'll toss it to you now, Jordan. From these first couple games, what are your thoughts on what you're seeing from Denver? Do you think I'm completely out there still and believing in this Nuggets team? And the Jokic injury, how does that factor in? If you think it's severe enough.
Yeah, I mean, anytime you get an injury to one of the better players, and as I'm sure we'll talk about with Giannis, it's something to keep an eye on. They need Jokic and Murray and those guys at full, complete strength if they want to have any shot in this series. I mean, Henry and I talked about it after Game 1, where the Clippers were pretty much dominated start to finish. Yeah. I thought this was going to be a wrap. I thought it was going to be 4, maybe 5 games max. Denver now does have a chance to make it interesting. That they obviously, I think they were a little fatigued. You had even though it wasn't a well played Game 7 against Utah, it's a Game 7. It's mentally, it's physically, emotionally draining. So I think they came out a little flat, and the Clippers did have some time to rest. So now that Murray and those guys had a chance to kind of assess, what they struggled with in the first game, they did a really good job turning around. Both Jokic and Murray were very efficient. On offense, kind of picking the spots that the Clippers gave them and making them pay. They also helped out. Porter Jr. finally had a better game shooting wise. Yeah. Paul Millsap even if Paul Millsap can give you 13-6, that's a win. That's a win. Yeah. Gary Harris is starting to get his legs under him, which is going to help them. At least in terms of trying to slow down Paul George and Kawhi. Kawhi kind of stunk, and I think he was due for one.
They doubled him a lot. They doubled him a lot in that game between Harris and Jokic stepping up in the middle, and then sometimes Jamal Murray was shifted up as well. And it's not easy to slow down Kawhi, despite the fact that he's mostly known for his defensive play. He's just as talented an offensive player as he is a defensive player. I'm curious, do you think that that's going to be a strategy Denver's going to continue to implement? Do you think it's going to continue to be effective if they do?
Well, and I'm sure you can attest to this, probably watching more of Denver this year than I did. That's the key to it, right? Is Jokic, I think, is the big key on defense. When he gives consistent effort on both ends of the floor, we know what he's going to do offensively. We know he can score in the post. We know he can shoot a little bit. We know he's a great passer. But when he's able to commit on the defensive end, not get in foul trouble, not go around whining and complaining and everything, when he's able to give 100% energy on that end, that's a huge boost for them because, now he's able to do stuff like help double with Kawhi because the Clippers don't have anybody that's going to make you pay, like a shooting wise, like if Zubac's out there on the floor, like he's someone that can only score within 7-8 feet. Yeah. So they're going to have opportunities to do that and double on Kawhi, double on Paul George, and just make some of these other guys beat you, which I think is going to be huge for them. And they have a chance. I mean, I'm not going to. I would still think Clippers. I still think Clippers in 5. I think is very reasonable. I can see the Clippers taking the next 3. But the Nuggets did, they have some momentum now. If their shooters can going as well. I mean, they're 15 of 40 from 3, which is which is going to help to keep them in the game because the Clippers can score from 3 as well. So it'll be interesting. It's going to come down to the effort on defense. The saying is that defense wins championships, and we have a lot of cliche sayings in the world, but this one is true. You got to commit on the defensive end. The Clippers are going to do that. Now, can guys like Jokic, Gary Harris, like I said, getting his legs should be more effective as well. It's going to be interesting to see if they can keep that level up there, games 3 and games 4.
Sure. I do have one closing thought on this series before we move into some of the Eastern Conference stuff. I harped on the fact that Will Barton was out in that Utah series and how drastically that impacted that series. But if they had a healthy Will Barton in this series and they had Garris and Barton to contain Kawhi and PG, there's no real containing Kawhi, obviously. But if they had enough from those two guys to slow those two down, I would have felt like this series would have been Denver in maybe 6. But because they don't have that defensive power of Will Barton and Gary Harris is still not 100%, maybe he'll get there by the midway point of this series. I also think that tonight is sort of the pivotal game. I think whoever wins tonight takes the series because I think if Denver gains some momentum, it does sort of hinge on Denver for me. If they win tonight, they gain the momentum. Jamal Murray, he stepped down a little bit in game 1, but then he stepped back up in game 2. He's still playing very, very well. And if Jokic is out there and he's playing, if he's a little banged up, that's one thing. But if he's out there and he's playing, and he brings that energy and they go up 2-1 against the Clippers while they're the underdogs, I just feel like that's going to stick in Jokic's head. And we've talked so much about Jokic's attitude and the way that he steps into these games. Basically all season, if he steps on the court and he's like, I don't want to play today, he's just not going to play well. And if he steps on the court and he's focused, very few people can stop him, at least on the offensive end. So I think that tonight's going to be pretty pivotal. And I think that the Clippers, Outside of Kawhi, again, like so much of the Clippers is, Kawhi is sort of the contingency factor because he's so calm, cool, and collected. But I feel like, they dropped a couple against Dallas. If they drop a couple against Denver, I just see this Clippers team getting a little rattled. I feel like these guys on this Clippers team are not quite as level-headed as people expect them to be. People just think this Clippers team is level-headed because they have Kawhi as their anchor.
Right.
And I think guys, they have a couple young guys there with like Shaman and whatnot, but they also have Patrick Beverly and Harrell, who are emotional guys who claim
Beverly got tossed. Beverly
exactly.
stunk.
Well, that was going to be my point. Is they claim that they don't let stuff get to their head, but we just saw that something got into Beverly's head, and he did. Like, I feel like these guys, they are emotional. Stuff does get to them in the game. And Denver is a better team than Dallas. So if you underestimate this Denver team the way you underestimated Dallas, you will pay for it. So that's just kind of where I think that this series might be headed, and I still feel comfortable about that Denver in 7. Looks like you're about to say something.
Yeah, no, I mean, props to you for sticking with it. We'll see obviously what happens. The other, I guess, final thing I would say was obviously what we just kind of harped on the defensive thing, but you still have to score the ball on the offensive end. And I think what you need to see is Jamal Murray. We gave him all the praise for round 1, and deservedly so. He was phenomenal. However, he was doing it against Donovan Mitchell and some of the other Utah guards who aren't great defensively. So this is like his test. He obviously kind of stunk in game 1, had a really good game 2. He's got to be their consistent cog. Like, Jokic is probably going to get his regardless of how, like, whether his shot's falling in the series, because he can go to the post against Zubac and Harrell pretty much anytime he wants. Yeah. But Murray's the one that's going to have, Paul George, Beverly, Kawhi at times. He's going to have those dudes keying on him because they obviously watched what happened in round 1. They know he's their guy. So if he can, we said he took the leap in round 1 and up to that kind of star level. Well, this is like the next rung on the ladder, so to speak. You got to be able to do it against elite defenders. Sure. Anybody can score in a game where there's not a lot of defense being played. But Murray's going to have to be efficient. Yep. He's going to have to, still create for others as well. I see he had 6 assists in game 2, but his consistency on offense has been kind of their issue at times over the last 2 years or so, especially in the playoffs. He's kind of had some good games and then some duds. So you can't afford a dud in this series is really, I guess, my point. So I think that'll be a big key, something to watch for tonight.
Yeah, actually, just one other follow-up from that. And the reason that I stick on Jokic as being the sort of the turning point in this series and why everything is going to rely on him is because, you're saying that he can pound in the paint and go up against Zubac and Harrell and score on them, but he's the best passing big man we've maybe ever seen in this game.
Oh, yeah.
And they're going to have to help. If Zubac and Harrell are getting torn apart inside, they're going to have to help. I don't think anybody's going to help off Murray, but if Denver's role players like Harris and Torrey Craig can start making shots, Michael Porter Jr., if he gets his legs back under him after a pretty brutal first round of the playoffs and can play well in this series, that could be another changing point. If they think that Michael Porter Jr. is off in this series and Doc Rivers decides to pull the help off of him, whether that be PG stepping inside or even some of these wing guys like Morris or somebody helping out inside on Jokic to try to, clog up the lane, Jokic is a good enough facilitator to where he can kick it out, and then it just does rely on Denver's role players and whether or not they can actually hit those shots. So that could also be a big turning point in this series.
For sure.
Let's go ahead and get into the Eastern Conference now. Let's start with Milwaukee and Miami. Jimmy Buckets continuing his reign. I know they had the loss yesterday. Giannis going down with the injury. 3-1. I still think this series is done. Honestly, this was it was the gentleman's sweep. You get the one game and then you're done. Give him the game 4 and game 5. It's a wrap. It's just like this Milwaukee team. And actually, I guess this is a good place to mention that Giannis could not play in the next game. He went down with ankle injury again. Obviously, had the aggravated ankle. Came in, played, and then went down and got injured. This is really weird for this Milwaukee team to be as good as they are. And I know, we've talked about the historic numbers and whatnot, but I think you mentioned on the last episode that I was on Monday where you talked about, they do have these incredible numbers, but when you're looking at some of these guys that are surrounding the core players like Giannis and Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, some of these guys have not been playing nearly as well recently as we were expecting them to play, and that has certainly impacted Milwaukee, and I think that's showing in this series. Chris Middleton did come back to life a little bit in this series, with your prediction for the first round, but he's been solid here, but it's not enough. It's not enough for Jimmy Butler is not necessarily, he's going out there a couple nights and dropping the 40s and whatnot, but then a couple nights he's going out there and dropping like 15 points and hitting free throws with 0 seconds on the clock left and just getting in Milwaukee's head. And Miami just seems to have the best of Milwaukee everywhere you turn. It's kind of crazy, honestly.
Yeah, it feels weird to say that the series is over, but I feel pretty comfortable in agreeing with you and saying that I think it's probably going to end. Are they playing tonight? Yeah, they should be. No, they're tomorrow. Tomorrow. Yeah, tomorrow. Sorry, Labor Day weekend screws up my whole calendar. But yeah, I feel comfortable saying tomorrow, Game 5, it should be. Miami should close them out. I would say almost regardless of whether or not Giannis plays. Kind of like we touched on, like you said, that they had these historic numbers during the regular season, but kind of hidden within that is that Giannis was one of the more consistent players we had in the regular season. He pretty much went out there and gave you 28, 12, and 6 a night, and just kind of ho-hummed his way through. And that he give kudos to him for doing that, but we've seen him struggle here so far. He's only averaging 22 points. He's not shooting a three. He's shooting even worse than he has during the regular season. He's not hitting free throws. He seems kind of like almost like a Siakam type situation, where Siakam seems to have been figured out a little bit by Boston in terms of like what he's going to do, especially on his drives. Same thing with the Bucks. The Heat have had a really good game plan, and I said this when we talked last Monday. I said it was interesting that with everything that happened 2 weeks ago with the boycotting and the delay of those games, is that Miami was already in the second round, so they got to sit and rest,
6 days or something, right?
Yep, they got to rest, they got to recover, do all that stuff. They got to watch extra film on Giannis, and I really think that helped. And I thought it was weird, even like going back to Game 1 of the series. It didn't doesn't seem like a fluke. None of this seems like a fluke. Miami's just been very prepared.
That's how you don't go up 3-0 and it's a fluke. Like, you have to be confident, you have to be prepared, you have to be ready, and you have to just outplay the other team, completely outmatch them at every single turn, and that's what they've done.
Yep, and it looks like the one thing that I've been saying a lot on Twitter is that they look like they've just solved the Bucks, and it happens. It reminds me of kind of like in the 2011 playoffs. The Lakers were the defending champs going up against a lower seeded Dallas in the second round. The year Dallas won it, and the Lakers got swept. And it wasn't one of those things where I thought it was a fluke, even though I was frustrated at the time. Dallas just was in a rhythm. They had the Lakers solved. They figured everything out, and that's kind of what you're seeing here. And Middleton was the only reason that they were lucky enough to win Game 4. Otherwise, this really could have been a sweep, because Giannis obviously did go out in that game. But you're also seeing some of the same skeletons that have haunted the Bucks in the last 2 years. Like Eric Bledsoe, he's shooting 39% in this series. He's been a dud. They've gotten some other contributions, like Brook Lopez has played pretty well. But on the other end, Miami's been executing on offense just so well. I mean, Jimmy's having a great series. Dragic is Dragic. Bam has gotten anything.
They're shooting well too. They're shooting really well too.
Yeah, exactly. And even down to their bench guys. I mean, Crowder, Hero, and Olynyk are all shooting 43% or higher from three. Even Jimmy's shooting 40% from three. So when they have all that going, and they're playing, what you're going to get from them defensively every game. So any extra shooting on offense is just a boost. That's what we talked about before the series started. Was can these we know Hero and Duncan and Dragic can shoot, but can these other guys get going? And they have, and that's the one thing too is they don't fear Milwaukee. There's they've gone out there confident every game in their game plan, in what they're going to do on both ends, and it's kind of like a, I don't know, this Bucks Giannis situation, which I feel like we can say that it's a situation now, because if they don't make a lot of changes this offseason, I don't see where they go from here, unless Giannis somehow, Giannis has, I think one thing we're learning is Giannis has some work to do, even as a guy that we consider one of the 3 best players and probably the 2-time MVP. Yeah. He's got to work on his outside shot. He's got to work on some other moves, because anytime he spins in the lane, they have somebody there for. He's clearly a little predictable right now. Mm-hmm. But I think it's just interesting. He's next summer or whenever we restart this again and have another season, he'll be a free agent. And I feel like you can kind of pinpoint this series. If we look back a year and a half from now, and he's on another team, whether it be Miami or Toronto or LA or whoever, this is something we're going to be able to look at and be like, it kind of started here with this be kind of shellacking that Miami's given them. It's kind of like a LeBron 2009, 2010 situation, where he kind of threw, LeBron kind of threw some duds in that Boston series of 2010. Didn't get a lot of help either from his teammates, but that was after 4 or 5, 6 years of the same thing over and over again. And I don't know. I don't know if I'm right. I don't know if I'm wrong, but I kind of see a lot of similarities there. And if you're a Bucks fan, you should obviously be worried about the series, but you should be worried about your future long term, because we're not that far off from Giannis having to make a decision. I could see him leaving
What
But
that was gonna be my next question to you is like what does Milwaukee do right now to try to fix what they've got going on? Because going into next season, the Eastern Conference doesn't get easier. You've got a Miami team who you just lost to, who is going to be better because they've had that core together for a year. They're going to only get better. The younger guys are going to get better, despite the fact that Dragic might be getting a little older. You have a Nets team that are going to be coming in. There's probably the favorites in the Eastern Conference that are behind KD and Kyrie. Boston and Toronto both don't look like they're slowing down any bit. If anything, those two teams are only getting better as well.
Who knows what the Sixers do? I mean, it's
we'll see about the Sixers. I don't want to jump the gun on that, but I am curious. What do you think Milwaukee can do this offseason to really get better? I don't see who are they going to move. What are they going to do? They're not going to fire Bud. Like what's
they should. They should actually. Yeah, that's one thing we didn't touch on that I've kind of been really frustrated with, and clearly all of Twitter has too.
Is Bud the regular season coach? Like wins 60 games in the regular season and doesn't show up in the playoffs like he did in Atlanta?
So you're saying he's the East Mike D'Antoni? Is that
basically, yeah.
Well, you're seeing it here. One thing that everyone talked about was that Bud doesn't make a lot of adjustments, and I don't think he really has in this series. And it's not just adjustments like on the court in terms of like what they're running. It's literally the fact like Giannis is playing 20, and maybe this is number slightly skewed with his lack of minutes yesterday, but he's only playing like 30 minutes a game in the series. This is the playoffs.
I think he was like at 35 before the injury game was factored into it or something.
He needs to be 40 plus. You've seen it with all the greats in the past, right? The LeBrons, the Kobes, the MJs, all the Durants, all these dudes come play in regular season time. They'd always play 35 plus.
Yeah.
Milwaukee was fortunate enough, and I had zero problems with him playing 31 in the regular season. They were winning. It worked. You got to keep him fresh. But what are you keeping him fresh for?
Yeah.
Like the fact that every 6-minute mark of the first quarter and the third quarter, he comes out. It blows my mind that he can't play the entire first quarter. Mm-hmm. If I were him, I think he's just being too nice of a guy to like, he doesn't have like that LeBron Kobe thing where it's like, no, I'll come out when I'm ready. He needs to do that. He needs to, if he comes back and he's healthy, he just needs to say, look, I'm going to go until I'm really exhausted. I need a breather, but like, I'll let you know. You don't have to take me out because it's ridiculous. How do you not play your star player 40 minutes a game in these must-win playoff games? This isn't, some series where they can fool around. This is the Heat. They're going to need Giannis for every minute he's on the floor. And so I would not be surprised if Bud is gone. I think it's gone that poorly. I think it's just an abrupt end. The Bucks came into this playoffs thinking, go to the finals, possibly win a title, and for them to not even make the conference finals, which is most likely not going to happen. I think as a 1 seed back-to-back years, I think Bud's going to be gone. Player-wise, it's tough because they got a lot of cap used up with Middleton and Bledsoe and Giannis and stuff like that. The big move I guess everyone keeps talking about is maybe the Chris Paul trade. But I'm not sure exactly what he's going to help them do because he's pretty for as good as Chris Paul was in these playoffs, he is very still ball dominant. Obviously, as a point guard.
That's exactly what I was going to say. The difference is playing alongside and Chris Paul became an off-ball player when he played with Harden. The difference is Harden is a better facilitator, I think, than Giannis is. Giannis is Giannis is going to pound inside and try to get his baskets, and that's about it. He's not an outstanding passer by any means, and that's where you're going to lose that sort of off-ball version of Chris Paul in Milwaukee. I don't see that being a good move at all.
No, and also when Chris Paul did have the ball in Houston or even Oklahoma City, he had a lot of shooters to pass to, and not that he wouldn't in Milwaukee, but like Giannis is not a guy you're like, hey, you spot up here and hit these open shots. He's still working on his own shot from 17, 18 feet beyond. So I'm not saying that they would be the right fit. I'm just saying that that's the one thing that keeps getting tossed around was like, somebody's got to take a swing on Chris Paul, especially after these playoffs. And I could see Milwaukee kind of out of desperation. Again, I keep paralleling Giannis and LeBron here because I feel like in a way they're similar. They both have these incredible numbers at such a young age, all these historic stats, MVP, stuff like that. And not only are they kind of struggling to get over the hump in the playoffs, you're also seeing, poor coaching, which LeBron's definitely had in Cleveland before. And
are you saying Mike Brown's a bad coach?
It is okay. Poor overall, management as well in terms of like putting pieces around him. You saw Cleveland in those 2008 10 years taking swings on Antoine Jameson, Shaquille O'Neal, guys that were washed. And I'm not saying Chris Paul's washed, but he may not be. Out of desperation, they may take the swing on him, and I wouldn't be surprised if it didn't work out. But other than that, I'm not really sure what other. I mean, they have so much cap room tied up. Nobody's going to be calling saying that they want Eric Bledsoe or like Kyle Korver.
No.
So I'm not really sure. The other thing that's hurt the Bucks too that I didn't really touch on was I think their bench is really overrated. I think during the regular season they were in such a rhythm with Giannis and stuff that it didn't really matter. They played free, they played loose. But in the playoffs, everybody gets tight, and you've seen it. DiVincenzo really hasn't been good. Korver's been up and down with his shooting. George Hill has been actually really nice for them, but Wesley Matthews is a little bit older. Marvin Williams has been okay. Connaughton, like these guys, these aren't guys where I'm like, yeah, they can go out and get a bucket against the Heat. Like I'm not confident in any of those dudes to do that.
Sure.
So I think the bottom line is that I think we both agree the series is over, barring some crazy shenanigans. Miami does not seem like the team that's going to fold away a 3-1 lead either. I think they're too well coached, too disciplined, and I feel like we're harping on the Bucks, but you have to give credit to Miami. Like they came out with a great game plan. Like I feel we're not giving them enough. I mean, Jimmy Butler. I mean, he's got balls, man. Like he takes the big shots. Even in game 2, like he was at least making plays. He wasn't shooting a lot, and then obviously they hit the game-winning free throws. But then game 3 and game 4, he's back at it, making more jumpers than I think we've ever seen him. But he's also not afraid to take him. That was the thing in Philly when he was like, when they had their big 4 there, he was the only one that wanted to take shots in that game 7 with Kawhi. So give kudos to him, give kudos to their bench guys, Hero, even the young guys, Hero, Nunn. They've kind of gone out there with no fear too. It's going to be really cool to see. I have no favorite that I'm rooting for in that East, and I think it's just really cool to see a team like Miami, just that not afraid of the Bucks, not afraid of Giannis. They've been able to punch them in the mouth, and it looks like we'll at least see them, in the Eastern Conference Finals. Who they're going to play? Yeah. I thought we had it wrapped up. I thought
I thought so too. Yeah, I thought so too.
Boston went up 2-0 and has they have obviously a wild game 3 with the Anunoby buzzer beater. I kind of dismissed it as like, well, they had the Raptors had to play super, super well and have a buzzer beater just to make it a 2-1 series, but yet they came out and the Raptors played hard again. Give credit to the defending champs for not lying down, and we now have best of 3 series. So what are you thinking that's going to happen? What have you seen so far? I know you haven't seen, like I said, you missed some stuff last week, but what did you see? What are your thoughts?
Yeah, when I tuned out of that series with all the stuff that I had going on this weekend, I basically thought basically what you were just saying is that Boston seemed to just have it locked up. And I didn't expect, I expected maybe Toronto to come back and win a game and maybe even push it to 6 at some point. But for them to win 2 in a row, I think it's a testament to how, Nick Nurse, Coach of the Year, Nick Nurse. And I think it's just a testament to how well coached this team is, because he instilled that confidence in his team, and those guys that were not playing well in those first 2 games, both on the offensive and the defensive end, just bounced back. And they look like the Toronto team that we saw in the regular season. And these past 2 teams, at least what I could tell from clicking through the games on highlights and whatnot, they look like the team that we were used to seeing. In terms of who I think is going to come out of this series, it's tough. It's really tough, and I wanna stick true to my original Toronto in 7 prediction. Maybe because they have a little bit of momentum here, but I also think that they are the better team of the 2. But these 2 teams, and we've said it here multiple times, they're so tightly contested. And this series has now sort of flipped to reflect that. And the next game is, getting ready to tip off very, very shortly in just under an hour. I think here's what I'll say. I think the key is going to come down to those point guard matchups between, your sort of rotation on Boston's end. Not even really a rotation, but sort of honing in on Kemba Walker, who we've both given a pretty hard time to on this podcast. Is he going to be there? He's been there. He's been there, and that's why they won those first 2 games, especially. And even the 3rd game being such a close, tightly contested match. He's been good. But are Fred VanVleet and Kyle Lowry going to get the best of him? I think so. Those 2 guys have been too consistent all season for them to just disappear here late in the playoffs. I just expect those 2 guys to get back to normalcy, and for that to be the sort of deciding factor in helping Toronto narrowly squeak away the win from Boston in the overall series.
Yeah, that's fair. And I would have, I think after even game 3, I would have thought the series was going to be probably a gentleman's sweep there, 4-1. But I think the crazy part too is like if we touched on Kemba. He's actually played pretty well, shooting the ball well in this series. We'll see if he can continue to do that. Other than that, the guys for Boston have played about the level that I thought they would. Jaylen Brown's been a little disappointing. He's only shooting 37% from the field and 27% from three. So he's kind of, if he picks it up a little bit, I think Boston has a good chance to win Game 5 tonight. However, if you're a Toronto fan, you told me, if I told a Toronto fan before the series started that after 4 games, Kyle Lowry, Van Fleet, and Siakam would be shooting 42, 33, and 39% from the field, and 23, 32, and 17% for Siakam from three. If I told you those numbers, they'd be shooting those after 4 games, you would probably think it was a sweep. And so the fact that they are here 2-2 with their big three struggling is something to keep an eye on, because Siakam, kind of like the Giannis thing that we mentioned, has been solved a little bit by the Celtics. He keeps going to that spin post-up move, and it just hasn't worked all series. But if he gets going, he's obviously a great two-way player. Van Fleet, I think he's going to get it going. We saw him perform. I always think, like, when guys aren't getting it going in a series, like, mentally, are they good? Like, are they nervous? Are they shrinking for the moment? We saw Van Fleet rise to the occasion last year in the finals and play phenomenally well. So I think he's going to get back to it. And even Lowry, I don't think Lowry's a great postseason player. He's on my list of guys I don't trust. However, he's proven he had a good playoffs last year, and he's only a couple threes away from being a big player in the series. So to have their big three playing that poor offensively and they're still in it should give Toronto fans some hope. We'll see. Like you mentioned, there's 2 very tightly contested teams. I expect a really close Game 5. We know the winner of Game 5 in a 2-2 series is, crucial. It's like an 85 or 90% success rate once they win that. So obviously tonight's a huge game. It's tough. My faith in Boston is really dropping after that last game. They just didn't play well. I think I'm going to take Boston barely. I think it hinges on what I talked about at the beginning, really, of the playoffs, which was, can Tatum take that next leap and have can he close? He's their superstar.
Yeah, that was going to be the exact point that I was about to make, is that
gotcha.
Boston has the best player in this series, and that's Jason Tatum. And Jason Tatum, has shown up in big series, in big games, time and time again in the playoffs. He did it in his rookie season against LeBron James. So if he's going to do it again, it's going to be here, and it is going to hinge on him for Boston. I understand that Jaylen Brown is not playing well, but you rely on him just a little bit more for defense, for offense. So if he's dropped off on the offensive end, he's still there on defense. You're fine. Marcus Smart is obviously there for defense. Enes Kanter is going to come off the bench and give you some points. They've got a very, very well-rounded team. But I think if they want to take over in this series and really, really win this series, it does hinge on Tatum becoming a superstar right here in front of our eyes. Like, I think this is the moment for him to step up. If it doesn't happen now, then it's going to have to wait until next season. That's kind of how I sit on it.
Yeah, and to kind of highlight him in the series, he's not having a bad series. He's averaging 24, 9 rebounds, 4 assists, and he's shooting the ball pretty well. Percentages are looking good from the field and from three. They're very, very good, but they're not like at the elite level that I think he could go to. And
you need to get that point of like 28, 29 points a game at least.
For sure. And so that'll be the key here. I expect him to have a good night tonight. Obviously, it's tough. He's going against Siakam and Anunoby, and those guys are going to make him work just like he's going to make them work on their end. But if it's a close game late, it's going to come down to, can Tatum close, or will somebody honestly, I think for Toronto, if it's a late game, I don't think you're going to Siakam. I think you're going to put the ball on Van Fleet, and maybe Kyle Lowry. So it'll be interesting to see which of the stars for each team can kind of show up. One thing I will highlight, just because I harped on it with the Giannis thing. Lowry, Van Fleet, Siakam, and Tatum are all playing 40-plus minutes a game in the series. That is what you do. So, Budenholzer, if you're tuning into this, which you're not, listen to me. Just something I wanted to point out. But I'm excited. I wish we could have, I feel like at the end of the series, we're going to be I wish we had 14 games of these two teams, because they are so well coached, so fun to see. It's been definitely an enjoyable series so far. I can't wait to see what happens tonight.
Even this second round, even the series that is, distant in terms of Milwaukee and Miami, those games have still been fun, because either Miami has just looked so dominant and so surprising that it's just been entertaining to watch Jimmy Butler go out there and just completely tear the Bucks apart, or we get that crazy sort of game 2 it was, right, finish where the terrible free throw calls and whatever going on there. It's been fun. It's been a fun second round so far. Some mostly tightly contested matchups. I do want to loop around back to Milwaukee, because you did send me a message on Twitter last week, a tweet that you saw. You were talking about Bucks possibly ousting Bud, and we saw that Greg Popovich put his house on sale in San Antonio. Is that door opening? Any chance? Any chance? But Bud does come from the Greg Popovich school of thought. So is the next step, is the next best thing, bringing Pop into Milwaukee? What are your thoughts on that situation?
Well, it was interesting because I remember they kind of kept linking Popovich to the Nets, who I think was something else we didn't really cover yet.
Did you guys talk about that? Yeah, we didn't talk about that.
I don't think it happened.
It happened over the weekend, right? So Friday or Thursday, maybe. So let's quickly talk about that. Steve Nash being hired as the Brooklyn Nets head coach. Well, let's just be completely honest here. You and I have got a little bit of a back and forth going on about how I'm a big Steve Nash fan. You like Steve Nash, but you're not a big Steve Nash fan.
Not a big Steve Nash fan. Definitely interesting move. I mean, I don't think anybody saw it coming.
It caught everybody off guard. Players, anybody in the league, all of us. I think it got literally everybody off guard. It seems, we've seen a lot of. What's the best way to put this? We've seen a lot of newly retired, not that old guys coming into the league. A lot of guards, especially, coming into the league, coaching. Whether you look at Jason Kidd or even Steve Kerr, who a little bit older than Jason Kidd or Steve Nash, but some of these guys have had success. Some of these guys have not had success. What are your thoughts on that? I like the move. I like the move. He's got a relationship with Katie and Kyrie both. I think he is a very deserving player of the credit that he gets from throughout his career. And I think that he's got a good basketball mind. We've seen him be an analyst, and I think the analysts just have good minds for the sports that they're talking about. We've seen him do it for basketball and for soccer. But I just think that he was always known for being one of the smartest players out there on the court when he was there. Despite whatever numbers he's putting up. And I think that that's what you need for this. Whether or not he's going to be the right fit for two superstars of that caliber, we'll wait to see. But I think that he's going to skew closer to the Steve Kerr than he is to the Mark Jackson, if I'm being completely honest with you.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Like we talked about, it kind of caught everybody off guard. But at the same time, once we looked at it closer, him and the GM, Sean Marks, had they have like a 15-year relationship. Obviously, he was a player development coach on the Warriors with KD.
Warriors, he's coming from that Warrior school too. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and he's good with Kyrie, and that's what it was. It was a move that the GM was comfortable with. It was a move that I know I'm sure KD and Kyrie signed off on. Excuse me. So I agree with you. I think it'll be. I'm not saying he's going to be Steve Kerr. I'm just saying in terms of being from that tree, kind of like I think I'd see him being kind of laid back on the sidelines. They're going to run an offense similar, I think, to what you saw maybe in Golden State. I'm sure he's picked Steve Kerr's brain and taken some of those concepts. It helps that you have, I would assume KD's still going to be a top 10 guy in this league when he comes back, and Kyrie's probably anywhere near top 10, top 20. So it helps having those two as your foundation. They have some other nice pieces. I think they're going to do well. I think, like you mentioned earlier, that they should be the favorite or co-favorite in the East next year. And I think the crazy part is they're definitely not done. I think that as much as we've enjoyed Karis LeVert, he seems to kind of be the piece on the table right now in terms of could they dangle him and some draft picks and some other guys for either a third star or maybe not necessarily a superstar, but like somebody mentioned, like Drew Holiday, like something like that, where they could add an extra piece that could fit a little bit better. Because I think LeVert's not a great spot 3-point shooter, does really well creating. I think he showed that he was a great playmaker in the bubble. But you already have that in Kyrie and KD. There's only one ball, so they kind of need like a defensive minded two-way player that can hit a lot of spot up shots. I think is going to be what they look for. So we'll see what moves they make. We obviously have some time here, but definitely interesting. Caught everybody off guard. Twitter was in a frenzy for a while. Yeah. But we'll see. He's a high IQ player, and whether I enjoyed watching him play was a different thing. But he was you can't deny he was an absolute genius at the point guard position. And you often see, we've had obviously some hits and some misses. Mark Jackson, Jason Kidd, and whatnot. But we've had a lot of hits too from point guards that have gone on to be coaches, just because they're so used to seeing the floor and kind of looking at the game differently than power forwards and centers. So we'll see what happens. It'll be interesting to see what Brooklyn does here in the next couple months before the startup.
Yeah. So that'll bring us to a close. Now that we got that, now I think we have to make it honorary Steve Nash. You just wanted to touch on that. If they do win the championship, I want you to say that you've always been wrong about Steve Nash on the air, so we can get it on camera. Okay. That's fine. All right, let's shake it.
Not worried about it. But yeah.
But yeah, that'll bring us to a close for this episode. Thanks to everybody who joined us. Find our social medias down there. Be sure to follow Nuts and Bolts Sports on our website as well as on all social media. And we'll have some more updates on a couple game threes. Maybe Miami done. Maybe Miami finishes it off. Come back and join us Wednesday to talk about all of that. Thanks for joining us.